All right, so welcome to the wholesale section of the Amazon Dropship Pro course. All right, so in this section, we're going to cover everything about wholesale dropshipping. I'm going to give you suppliers, I'm going to give you all the information. But first and foremost, in this first lecture, I just kind of want to cover the differences and the benefits of wholesale dropshipping, why you should even be interested in it, right? Now, the majority of you aren't going to start here. If you want to start here, that's totally fine with this module, but the majority of you are going to start with the retail dropshipping, kind of get your feet wet there, and then kind of move over to this because it's more long-term, more sustainable, and there's more benefits to it, right? So let's cover some of those benefits of wholesale dropshipping and the differences between dropshipping from wholesale suppliers, which is this section, versus retail suppliers, which is the original section that you just went through, right? And there are many benefits to that. So overall, the business model remains the same, but you simply source with wholesale suppliers. Obviously, you simply source and set up relationships with wholesale suppliers instead of the retail suppliers, right? Pretty self-explanatory. Now, again, you're still using a third party to store your inventory and then to ship that inventory out to your customers and do the order fulfillment for you. So nothing changes there, right? The only difference is you'd be having a wholesale supplier do that versus a retail supplier and a retail store to do that, right? Like Walmart, .com or HomeDepot.com or BestBuy.com. Like those are retail suppliers, whereas here we're setting up relationships with wholesale distributors and wholesale suppliers, okay? Also, you're going to get better margins here. So when you purchase products at wholesale prices, it's typically going to be closer to the manufacturing cost and closer to, a better margin because there's a lot more wiggle room from where you're purchasing the price at versus like the MSRP and what it's typically sold for on Amazon, right? It's typically much lower than retail as well, obviously, because you're cutting out the retailer who's the middleman, right? The retail store, and going directly to the source, directly to the distributor, right? So the way that the supply chain works is you have the manufacturer, and then you typically have a wholesale distributor or a wholesale supplier who gets the products from the manufacturer, which then gives them typically to the retailer who marks them up, which then you buy them from and you mark them up, obviously, to drop ship from your customer. Whereas here, we're going either directly to the brand, so we're either going directly to the manufacturer, which cuts everybody out, or we're going directly to the distributor or the wholesaler, which cuts out the retailer, right? So there's going to be, regardless of which one you do, and typically we're going to be working with wholesale distributors and wholesale suppliers, which is the second kind of step there. Regardless of how far down that chain you move, you're cutting out the retail supplier, so your margin's going to be better typically, right? Now, you don't also have to pay sales tax with most wholesale suppliers, and that's going to be a key. There are like exceptions to this rule. There are some decent wholesale suppliers that do actually charge you sales tax, but that's rare, okay? The majority of wholesale suppliers are going to take your EIN in, they're going to take your reseller's permit in, and they're going to remit sales tax, obviously, so that you don't have to pay it, right? Because you're not the end consumer there, right? You're obviously buying those goods with the intention of selling them or drop shipping them to the end consumer who then owes the sales tax. You don't, right? So you're not going to have to pay sales tax, obviously, with wholesale suppliers, which is a major difference and a major increase to your overall profit margin, both, in each individual transaction, but also overall, right? And this is only going to really be the case with retail suppliers if you're tax exempt on certain suppliers. So for example, I'm tax exempt on Amazon any single time, not with every state, but with most states. So like every single time I order on Amazon and I drop ship from Amazon, which obviously has its benefits. Like if you're drop shipping from Amazon to like Facebook Marketplace or from Amazon to like somewhere else, I don't pay sales tax on those transactions because I'm tax exempt. Although with other suppliers, for example, like eBay, it's a complete headache to get tax exempt because you need to get tax exempt in every single state pretty much in order to get that, in order to get, tax exempt on all your purchases, because you're not drop shipping to one state. Typically you're drop shipping to a bunch, right? Same thing with like Walmart or like Home Depot. Like they have tax exemption programs, they're retailers. So does Bed Bath and Beyond, so does Best Buy. But again, same thing, you're not going to be able to just give your reseller's permit and then get tax exempt on all of those specific supplier or on all of those specific states on that supplier. It'll typically only be for the state that you have your permit in, right? So most cases and most suppliers that you're going to be dealing with on Amazon when you're drop shipping to Amazon, like we're covering in this course, you are not going to be tax exempt for. And so one of the benefits, key benefits of dropshipping from a wholesale supplier is that you don't have to pay that sales tax, right? And you might be thinking, like, because I did this in the beginning, this was one of the biggest revelations in my business. Like, after I started looking at the numbers, I was like, holy shit, I'm leaving a lot of money on the table. So like, for example, like let's say you buy something from your supplier for $40, right? And the tax comes out to like, I don't know, like randomly, like let's say like $4, right? You're like, okay, it's $4. It's not that big of a deal. I'm still making, let's say for example, $10 on your profit margin, right? But if you got that $4, it's not that big with that transaction, but over the course of a month, this can add up to thousands of dollars every single month that would otherwise be profit that you're then paying to the state that you don't need to be paying because you're not actually the end consumer of that product, so you don't owe the sales tax there, right? So that's a major distinction. You might think it's small, but it is actually big, and it adds up to a lot of money over the months, over the years that you're doing this. So that's obviously a benefit as well, right? Now, also, this is fully compliant with Amazon's terms of service. So obviously, you're going to have a valid supply chain in case they, might inquire about a product, or in case a customer's not happy, or if you need an invoice. Also, you'll be able to get ungated with this if you're buying invoices of 10 plus quantity to get ungated with those suppliers, and then drop shipping after the fact. Like, that's a completely different topic. But the key here is you'll have a valid supply chain and proof of that valid supply chain, because you can always show invoices from a wholesale supplier to prove authenticity on Amazon, as well as show Amazon that you are indeed sourcing from a legit distributor and not a retail supplier. They hate that, right? So for example, if ever there was an issue with an order or a product and Amazon asked you about it, if you were dropshipping from a retail supplier, the last thing that you'd want to do is show that invoice, right? Because then you're basically incriminating yourself and showing them that you are dropshipping from a retail supplier. Whereas if you're drop shipping from a wholesale supplier, you want to show that invoice because A, it's proof that you actually sent the product. B, it's proof that you actually had the product and sent the product that the customer ordered in that variation, that UPC, that SKU, etc. And also C, it's proving that you are sourcing from a legitimate distributor and you have a relationship set up with a legitimate distributor of that brand and that product, right? All of which Amazon loves. So that's huge there. Also, most wholesale companies won't put invoices in the box, another thing that's huge, or put themselves as the seller of record when drop shipping or providing order fulfillment to the customer, which is exactly what Amazon's asking for in its drop shipping policy, right? We've covered this in the first section of the course, like the first couple lectures. One of the things that Amazon does, because a lot of people think you're not allowed to drop ship on Amazon, and you are allowed to drop ship with Amazon. It literally says you are allowed in the terms of service. The only key is you can't be the seller, or you can't be drop shipping from stores that provide it with the seller that provide themselves as the seller of record. So for example, what I'm trying to say is, like, you could technically drop ship from Walmart onto Amazon if big if here, and obviously this if is never going to happen, if you set up a relationship with Walmart so that every single time you ordered and drop shipped from them, they put you as the seller of record on the actual invoice and put that in the box, and also didn't have it with a branded Walmart box, right? But that's never going to happen. Retailers don't set up those relationships with you, and they also don't typically want you drop shipping. It's not like they're going to ban you necessarily for drop shipping, although some of them will. Retailers, that is. But you don't want to go out and advertise, basically saying to them, like, hey, I'm drop shipping. Like, can you, put invoices? They're not going to put invoices specifically showing you as a seller of record because they want the credit for distributing it to the customer, right? So whereas with wholesale companies, they're not going to put invoices saying that their company is the seller of record on that in the actual box. And they're also not going to be shipping to the customers with branded boxes. So even if you go with the most obscure retail suppliers, which obviously the more obscure you go, the better, because the customer won't recognize the supplier. Also, they're typically not going to put invoices in that are going to tick customers off or anything like that. But if, like, you were drop shipping from Walmart specifically to Amazon, Walmart always, and this is just one example, Home Depot does this. There's a lot of different companies that do this. And even like Bed Bath & Beyond does this. Best Buy does this from time to time. Like, they come typically in like Walmart boxes that say Walmart all over the place with a Walmart invoice in there, right? And so the customer is going to know immediately that, like, okay, I ordered from Amazon, but I got it in a Walmart box. It's coming with a Walmart invoice that's showing the product price as less than I paid for it on Amazon. And most customers won't pay attention to that, but some will. And all it takes is one or two to get your account flagged, right? Whereas this is not something that you'll run into with wholesale companies. Also, for example, one of the places that I drop ship from for a while when I was doing retail drop shipping more significantly, obviously, I'm still doing retail drop shipping, but I'm moving more into wholesale for all the reasons that we're outlining here into this module specifically. It's more sustainable long term. There's better prices. Once you set up relationships with companies, you can build like all those things we're going to cover in this section. But one of the things I used to drop ship from, or one of the companies I used to drop ship from a lot was Bed Bath & Beyond. And like I ran, I don't know, like hundreds of transactions from them and made a lot of money, if not maybe into the thousands. But the key was what customers would always message me and be pissed off about was invoices in their boxes showing the price less. So they didn't come in a branded Bed Bath & Beyond box, but what happened was they would get invoices in there showing that like, hey, they purchased, the invoice shows it that the purchase price was $20, but like they paid $42 on Amazon. What's the deal? And I would get messages from them all the time. And because I didn't want them to be pissed off and report it to Amazon, I would just refund them, which obviously, is losing my is cutting into my profit margins, but also is more of a headache to have to refund customers and deal with those problems. I don't want to have to deal with those problems. All of those things are examples and things that you're not going to have to deal with on wholesale suppliers. So obviously that's a benefit also. And most retailers, obviously, like I did say, we just cover this, ship in branded boxes, or they do typically put invoices in their boxes. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And that's the last thing that you want because Amazon hates that, right? I'm not saying you can't do it. Obviously, the entire first part of the course shows you how to do it effectively, but it is a risk. And obviously, you're not going to know which suppliers do that until you do enough orders and find out, right? Which is obviously risky. Also, this is a more sustainable and long-term form of dropshipping, right? Because it's more difficult to do it this way, and it's a lot easier to source from retailers, there's actually, believe it or not, a lot less competition with wholesale dropshipping and on wholesale dropshipping listings, typically. Not always, but typically, okay? Because also, it's fully compliant with the Amazon terms of service like we covered, it is more long-term and sustainable, and it is something that you can count on as a long-term business that you can then scale without worrying about it, right? So when I was scaling up retail to like hundreds of thousands in sales, right, I was constantly worried about it because it was like, all it takes is one email from Amazon, one ticked off customer, whereas like Amazon's going to get pissed, shut me down, and then hold my money. And thank God that never happened, fingers crossed, but which is also a reason why like it's good to start there. But then as you scale, you want to move into wholesale because you have all the tools, right? You have all the experience, you know how to make money with the business model, and you've proven the concept. Now turn it into a sustainable business long-term, and you can move all the strategy and stuff that you learned into products that you can actually build long-term, right? So that's exactly what I'm doing, and that's exactly why I recommend it to you. And that's exactly why you want to count on that, obviously, long-term and move eventually into wholesale. Also, because you're building with strong relationships with these suppliers, long-term, as you order more and more, you can negotiate better prices, which is obviously something that you'll never be able to do on retail suppliers. You can't reach out to Walmart customer service. You can't reach out to even eBay, people, or like literally any example. Like no company that's a retailer is going to give you better deals simply because you're like, hey, I'm drop shipping to thousands of customers. I've purchased from you hundreds of times. Give me a better deal. They're going to be like, no, the price is the price. Whereas a wholesale supplier, you can say, hey, I've drop shipped this, or hey, I'm sending you customers, and I've sent you, 100, whatever the number is. Like obviously as you scale, you'll have more leverage there. But like, hey, I've sent you over 300 customers now. Is there any way we can work out a lower price here, so that it benefits both of us? Because obviously you're sending them enough business to where they're going to make it worth your while to keep you, right? So you're building that relationship. You're going to negotiate better prices over the long term. This isn't something you're focused on in the beginning. It's just good to know that that's a possibility going forward, right? Also, typically this is the best of both worlds, right? Because with wholesale suppliers, like nothing changes in the business model. We still never have to handle the products or even ship them to customers ourselves. And we're getting all the benefits of it, of that part of the retail dropshipping, but also there's none of the risk, right? So it's best of both worlds. The major differences here, just to outline them again, is that we can finally get better prices. There's obviously less competition overall on these wholesale products and wholesale listings. Typically, it's also fully terms of service compliant on Amazon. So there's nothing to worry about long-term, whereas with the business, whereas retail dropshipping, obviously it's risky long-term, even though it can be super profitable in the short term, and building a long-term sustainable, scalable business that we can count on for the foreseeable future, right? So it's a no-brainer. In conclusion, obviously, The whole message I'm trying to convey here in this introduction to, wholesale dropshipping for you is that even though finding wholesale products to dropship is harder work up front, okay, that's a given. It's not gonna be as easy to find wholesale products. We're gonna cover different methods that you can obviously use to find products specifically. I'm going to teach you reverse sourcing from your own retail products. I'm going to teach you reverse sourcing from competitors. I'm going to teach you how to actually find wholesale suppliers that you can dropship from, set up relationships from, and then obviously scan their product catalogs. So you will be able to find them, but it is typically harder to find wholesale dropshipping suppliers, and it's going to be more work up front. But that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing because it weeds out the competition. There's better margins, obviously. There's less competition, like I just outlined, and there's more safety overall as a long-term sustainable business that's more scalable, right? So it is the best of both worlds, and it's a no-brainer to eventually move into wholesale dropshipping. If you're watching this and you're just getting started with like let's say hypothetically, like you're just watching the course, all the way through, and you haven't really started that much, like it's totally fine to start with retail on a small scale and learn those things, right? Use every tip that I go over in the retail module and don't drop ship from typical suppliers like Home Depot or Walmart or anything like that. Drop ship from obscure retail suppliers using all the tips that I've gone over, right? You can start there. But eventually you want to move into wholesale. And if that's you right now, then obviously this is perfect as well. Okay. It's more long-term, more sustainable, more profitable, and safer.